It sounds simple. Plants use sunlight to make food, but what's really happening is one of the most elegant energy conversion systems in nature. A chain of physics, chemistry, and biology all working together inside a single leaf. Life is built from chemical reactions, and chemical reactions require energy. Animals get energy by eating. They break down food, extract glucose, and use it to make ATP, the molecule that powers cellular work. But plants do something fundamentally different. They don't eat glucose, they build it. And to build glucose, they need a source of energy powerful enough to assemble molecules from scratch. That energy source is sunlight. Sunlight is electromagnetic radiation, packets of energy called photons. And photosynthesis is the process of capturing photons and converting their energy into chemical bonds. So now the question becomes, how does a plant catch light? That brings us directly to chlorophyll. Inside plant cells are organelles called chloroplasts, tiny green structures specialized for photosynthesis. And inside chloroplasts is the molecule that makes photosynthesis possible, chlorophyll. Chlorophyll absorbs light strongly in the red and blue parts of the spectrum, but reflects green, which is why plants look green. But chlorophyll doesn't just absorb light like a sponge. When it absorbs a photon, it becomes excited. An electron inside chlorophyll jumps to a higher energy state. That excited electron contains the energy from sunlight, and if the plant can capture that electron's energy in a controlled way, it can store sunlight as chemical energy. So photosynthesis begins when sunlight excites electrons. But excited electrons don't last long. They want to fall back down. So the chloroplast needs a system that moves those electrons quickly and productively. That system is called the photosynthetic electron transport chain. Photosynthesis happens in two main stages. The first is called the light-dependent reactions, or simply the light reactions. These take place in the thylakoid membranes inside the chloroplast. The goal of the light reactions is to convert sunlight into two energy molecules, ATP, NADPH. ATP is the general energy currency of cells. NADPH is a high energy electron carrier like a rechargeable battery. Together, ATP and NADPH store the energy harvested from sunlight, ready to be used for sugar production. So how do the light reactions produce them? It starts with a structure called Photosystem II. Photosystem II is a cluster of proteins and chlorophyll molecules. Sunlight hits chlorophyll, excites electrons, and those electrons are passed to an electron transport chain. But here's the problem. If chlorophyll keeps losing electrons, it will eventually run out. So the plant needs a source of replacement electrons. That source is water. Photosystem II splits water molecules 2H2O, yields 4H plus 4E minus plus O2. This reaction does three important things at once. It provides electrons to replace the ones lost from chlorophyll. It releases oxygen as a waste product. It generates hydrogen ions, H+, which help create ATP. So the oxygen you breathe is not made for you. It's the leftover from plants extracting electrons from water. Now that electrons are flowing, they move through a chain of proteins that transfer their energy step by step. And as they move, something crucial happens. The chloroplast builds a proton gradient. As electrons travel through the electron transport chain, their energy is used to pump H+ ions into the thylakoid space. That creates a high concentration of protons inside the thylakoid and a low concentration outside. This difference in proton concentration is called a proton gradient, and gradients are stored energy, like water held behind a dam. The protons want to flow back out, but they can only escape through a special molecular machine, a ATP synthase. ATP synthase is a rotating protein complex, basically a tiny biological turbine. As protons rush through it, the enzyme spins and forces ADP plus phosphate to combine into ATP. This process is called chemiosmosis, and it's one of the most important energy mechanisms in biology. So far, sunlight has given the plant oxygen, ATP, and a stream of electrons. But electrons don't just flow forever. They need a final destination, a place to store them safely. That brings us to Photosystem I. After passing through the electron transport chain, electrons arrive at Photosystem I. Sunlight excites them again, boosting their energy even higher. These high energy electrons are then transferred to a molecule called NADP+, turning it into NADPH. NADPH is basically an electron carrier filled with high energy electrons, like a fully charged battery. At this stage, the light reactions are complete. They have converted sunlight into ATP and NADPH. But sunlight isn't directly used to make sugar. Instead, ATP and NADPH are used to build sugar in the second stage of photosynthesis. This second stage is called the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle is often called the dark reaction, but that name is misleading. It doesn't happen in the dark. It just doesn't require light directly. This cycle happens in the stroma of the chloroplast, the fluid surrounding thylakoids, and its job is to take carbon dioxide and turn it into sugar. Now, carbon dioxide is stable. It doesn't want to react. To turn CO2 into glucose, plants need energy, and they use ATP and NADPH from the light reactions to do it. So the light reactions capture energy, and the Calvin cycle stores it in bonds. The Calvin cycle begins with carbon fixation. CO2 enters leaves through tiny pores called stomata, then it diffuses into chloroplasts. The Calvin cycle starts when CO2 is attached to a 5-carbon molecule called RUBP. This reaction is catalyzed by the most abundant enzyme on Earth, Rubisco. Rubisco attaches CO2 to RUBP, creating a 6-carbon molecule that immediately splits into 2 3-carbon molecules called 3-PGA. This moment is carbon fixation, so carbon from the atmosphere becomes part of a biological molecule. Now the plant has carbon in its system, but it's not sugar yet, so the cycle moves to the next step, reduction. The 3-carbon molecules are chemically modified using ATP and NADPH. ATP provides energy. NADPH provides electrons. This converts 3-PGA into G3P, a higher energy 3-carbon sugar precursor. Some G3P leaves the cycle to eventually become glucose and other carbohydrates, but most G3P stays in the cycle to regenerate RUBP because the cycle can't continue without it. And this regeneration step is powered again by ATP. So the Calvin cycle is essentially a carbon recycling loop: fix CO2, energize, produce sugar, regenerate the starting compound. After several turns, enough G3P accumulates to form one glucose molecule. At this point, photosynthesis has done its core job. Light energy has become chemical energy. But there's one more important piece. Why is photosynthesis so critical to life beyond just plants? Photosynthesis is the reason Earth has oxygen. Before photosynthetic organisms evolved, oxygen was almost absent. Then cyanobacteria began splitting water and releasing oxygen. Over millions of years, oxygen accumulated, creating the atmosphere that made complex life possible. But oxygen isn't the only output. Photosynthesis also creates biomass, sugars, cellulose, starches, which become the base of almost every food chain. Even when you eat meat, the energy still came from plants first, because the animal ate plants and plants got their energy from sunlight. So all ecosystems are powered by photosynthesis. It is Earth's primary energy gateway. And yet, photosynthesis isn't perfectly efficient, and plants have evolved variations to optimize it. Most plants use C3 photosynthesis, the basic Calvin cycle pathway, but Rubisco has a flaw. It sometimes binds oxygen instead of CO2, especially when conditions are hot and dry. This causes photorespiration, wasting energy. Some plants evolve solutions. C4 plants, they separate carbon fixation and the Calvin cycle into different cell types, concentrating CO2 around RUBISCO. This improves efficiency in hot climates. CAM plants, they open stomata at night to collect CO2, storing it until daytime to reduce water loss. This is common in desert plants like cacti. So photosynthesis adapts based on environment because life is always optimizing energy. And that brings us to the full picture. So what is photosynthesis really? Photosynthesis is a process of energy transformation. It takes light energy, water, carbon dioxide, and produces oxygen, glucose. But deeper than that, it's the chemical bridge between sunlight and life. It turns photons into electrons, electrons into ATP and NADPH, and ATP and NADPH into sugars. It is not just how plants eat, it is how the planet eats, how the atmosphere formed, how ecosystems exist, how energy enters biology at all. Photosynthesis is the reason Earth is alive.